All right, I want to focus on one point, a really interesting and rich point, I think, that William James makes in The Will to Believe, his defense of the legitimacy of religious faith, or the legitimacy of belief in access to the evidence, or unjustified belief with regard to religious matters, but with regard to a number of other matters as well. Um, I mean, one thing he's definitely saying is that we cannot avoid faith. Okay, like everyone starts out with a set of assumptions that they are not able to defend. That underpins science. It underpins mathematics. All right. Um, you got to accept some axioms somewhere. Oh, by the way, I've gotten some inquiries on Erwin S. Huber for General Assembly. I just want to say that we must elect Erwin S. Huber to General Assembly. Erwin S. Huber is who we are as Americans. You're probably wondering who you are as an American. I know I have. Well, Erwin S. Huber is who we are as Americans. That's right. And only he can redeem us. All right. So put him in the General Assembly. All right, now. It is amazing what people think politics is. They're basically explicitly saying politics is a bunch of hooey. It's about who we are as an American. Whatevs, man. I'll tell you who the fuck I am as an American. I'm not going to learn that from you, Bo Jivin, or whatever. All right, now. Politics will not redeem you or us. Anyway, so the state of play at the moment I want to enter into this is again he's arguing against Clifford's and similar people's position that it is wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything upon insufficient evidence. And first of all, James is arguing that that's definitely an impossible condition for a human being. We might think of that as the justification condition on knowledge. You don't know unless you are capable of producing decisive reasons, perhaps. But in Clifford and in James, we're talking about the ethics, epistemological ethics, like what it is okay to believe, and Clifford focuses on cases, obviously, where believing falsely or deceiving yourself, not examining the evidence, and so on, leads to disastrous results, as in the ship owner example, where he doesn't check the condition of the ship carefully. It goes down, drowning all aboard, and he is a murderer, says Clifford. He's responsible for those deaths as surely as he would have been if he had launched a torpedo. Okay? Just because he neglected to maintain the ship. All right, but there's a serious moral weight to belief in the cases that Clifford centralizes. And, so we've talked about this, what a genuine option is and the structure of James's overall argument in defense of faith understood in a certain way on certain matters. So again, like the conclusion of the whole thing is this portion in parentheses, in italics, on 349, section 4 of the Will to Believe. Our passional nature not only lawfully may, but must decide an option between propositions whenever it is a genuine option that cannot by its nature be decided on intellectual grounds. All right, now we've talked about what that means. So, do not decide, but leave the question open when you don't have decisive reasons on either side. That might seem like the rational response. I mean, often it is. I don't have decisive reasons to believe either P or not P. I'm just going to, I'm just going to suspend belief. But to leave the question open is itself a passional decision. And we've talked about, I guess, passion and reason, this opposition that James starts with and wants to break down. So just even suspending belief, we do for reasons that are basically emotive rather than cognitive. He set up a situation where to suspend belief is, to lose, if you suspend the belief in God, you lose the benefits of believing in God, if there are benefits to believing in God, as surely as you would if you denied it. And so he puts you in this exclusive dilemma. You have to come out one way or the other in a genuine option. Okay, but this is, I think, one of the most charming passages in Western philosophy. Maybe I'm just a fan of James, particularly as a stylist. I wish more philosophers were excellent prose stylists, or felicitous prose stylists. I guess all the famous philosophers are competent in a certain way. That's a minimum standard of to get into the debate at all. But and some of them are really wonderful writers. I've said that about Hume, of course. Not so much maybe James's kind of mentor in pragmatism, Peirce, for instance, and many others. But this is a lovely piece of writing. And I think this is closer maybe to the emotive heart of James's defense of faith than even the whole options setup, though they dovetail as well. So this is section 7 of the Will to Believe, 352 of our text. One more point, small but important, and our preliminaries are done. There are 2 ways of looking at our duty in the matter of opinion. And again, we're working a fully ethical epistemology, So our duty in the matter of opinion, our moral duty in the matter of opinion, really, or our epistemic duty, or perhaps he's breaking down those 2 normative dimensions. In other words, what you believe has moral consequences, or it is who you are morally, or something like that. And like I say, I think the discourse in epistemology over the last 20 years or so has kind of returned to this emphasis on the normative side of epistemology, and in virtue epistemology. Ways entirely There are 2 ways of looking at our duty in the matter of opinion. Ways entirely different, and yet ways about whose difference the theory of knowledge seems hitherto to have shown very little concern. We must know truth, and we must avoid error. These are our first and great commandments as would-be knowers. So, one thing he's saying is that truth and the avoidance of error are the built-in normative standards of belief. They're built into the concept of belief. Perhaps to believe is to take to be true. So from that, even from that, the fact that the paramount value in the epistemic dimension is truth, you could formulate 2 commandments, 2 imperatives, as he says, to express that goal. Avoid truth, avoid error, and seek truth. Now, those sure sound like the same thing offhand. Like, if people were just using those interchangeably, we must seek truth and we must avoid error, you wouldn't be surprised. But they are quite different in a way that, sort of never occurred to me until I read James, for instance. Believe truth, shun error. These, we see, are two materially different laws. And by choosing between them, we may end by coloring differently our whole intellectual life. We may regard the chase for truth as paramount, and the avoidance of error as secondary. Or we may, on the other hand, treat the avoidance of error as more imperative, and let truth take its chance. Clifford, in the instructive passage, which I have quoted and we've read, exhorts us to the latter course. Believe nothing, he says. Keep your mind in suspense forever, rather than by closing it on insufficient evidence, incur the awful risk of believing lies. And, in some sense, without the same robustious pathos, that's what James says of Clifford's style, Descartes holds the same, right? Like, he starts by doubting everything that he can find a reason to doubt, or everything that he can't give decisive reasons to believe. That seems to make the imperative to avoid error paramount. Methodological doubt. So, this is not just Clifford. And it's not even just the ethics of belief. It's the tradition of epistemology, really, going back to Plato. In seeking the truth, obviously these things are connected. In seeking the truth, Descartes says the first thing we're going to do is avoid error. That is, we're going to delete everything we can doubt. Everything that might be an error that we believe, we're going to suspend. Because, he says, in my education, I got a lot of stuff that now I think might not be true. So, to avoid this risk of believing lies, or believing jive, I'm going to doubt all that I believe. So first of all, is that possible? Peirce has beautiful arguments that it's not, actually. But Kierkegaard does, too. But anyway... okay, but this is what James says, and this is so characteristic of his thought, I have to say, or just his persona. Believe nothing, Clifford tells us, keep your mind in suspense forever, rather than closing it on insufficient evidence, incur the awful risk of believing lies. You, on the other hand, again, he's talking to the philosophy clubs of Yale and Brown. What year is this? 1910 or so. You, on the other hand, may think that the risk of being in error is a very small matter when compared with the blessings of real knowledge. So, one thing is that if you believe everything, if you disbelieve or suspend belief about everything that is in any way doubtful, or anything that doubts can be raised about, you would have prevented yourself from gaining any knowledge. All right? Or, maybe you can relieve these doubts, okay? There are many truths that you might have prohibited yourself a priori from believing. Because you can't construct decisive reasons for them. That doesn't mean they're not true. Okay? So that's what he's calling the blessings of real knowledge. Believing the truth. Okay? And so I think, actually, there's a interesting... there are interesting results from this for the definition of knowledge. For example... you, on the other hand, may think the risk of being in error is a very small matter, I think this maybe is his position, when compared to the blessings of real knowledge, and be ready to be duped many times in your investigation rather than postpone indefinitely the chance of guessing true. Like, so maybe you get the flash of intuition that solves the scientific problem, and you go, well, that's not justified. Where did that come from? Okay. Away with you. Or I don't see how to test that. Or something like that. Well, you might have just ditched the truth. You might have just ditched an error, though. Okay, of course. I myself find it impossible to go with Clifford. We must remember that these feelings of our duty about either truth or error are in any case only expressions of our passional life. These things like we must avoid error, like I'm scared of being wrong, or I'm sallying forth to believe a whole bunch of stuff, hoping that I'm right. Those are emotive conditions, or those are personality features. But that's what's underpinning epistemology, like, not foundation in sense data or something like that. But emotional commitments to the truth and what kind of thing truth is. And this is a major theme in this paper, is that if we didn't have an emotive belief, for example, that there is truth and that we can get it, we wouldn't be doing science at all right? So there's a series of sort of emotive commitments as well as detailed cognitive commitments that underpin science and mathematics and logic, for example, that are unjustifiable by the standards of mathematics, science, logic. For example, that truth is available and that we can get it. All right, we're built for it. But also maybe things like the principle of non-contradiction or something like that, or the axioms of Euclid. Things that you're just not going to be able to believe with no assumptions. A believer who is trying to do that would not believe anything. Their skepticism would be unbelievable. So if you don't believe anything, you don't know anything. But you're not making any mistakes. But if you do believe stuff on inadequate grounds, and of course we do, or you boldly, as I say, sally forth and start believing things, okay, of course you might believe falsely. That sucks. And sometimes it has disastrous practical consequences. But that's also the only road to believing anything true. Venture forth. Biologically considered, our minds are as ready to grind out falsehood as veracity, and he who says, better go without belief forever than believe a lie, merely shows his own preponderant private horror of becoming a dupe. Nietzsche says exactly this, actually, too, in The Gay Science. What's driving Descartes? Oh, the pure quest for knowledge. No, his private horror of becoming a dupe. The origins of reason are emotional. And the origins of this kind of epistemology of justification, where you have to be able to decisively demonstrate anything to be said to know it, also, ironically, expresses a fully emotional commitment. A horror of being duped. He may be critical of many of his desires and fears, but this fear, Clifford, Descartes, slavishly obeys. He cannot imagine anyone questioning its binding force. For my own part, I have also a horror of being duped. I'm taking that seriously. That's a problem. If you believe a whole bunch of false stuff, all kinds of things can go wrong. I, William James, do not want to believe a whole bunch of false stuff. But that's not my only epistemological goal. I can believe that worse things than being duped may happen to a man in this world. In other words, like, so I'm wrong. Shit. Well, that's better than being diagnosed with cancer, you know. I mean, sorry, you know. How much effect did my false beliefs actually have in the world? So Clifford's exhortation has, to my ears, a thoroughly fantastic sound. It's like a general informing his soldiers that it is better to keep out of battle forever than risk a single wound. Wasn't it like, I think famously, like, sort of when they teach American history, or they used to accuse General George McClellan of this during the Civil War. You know, he was Lincoln's top general, and he just kept refusing to go into battle. It's like, no, we're not ready yet. You know, we've got to be able to defeat the enemy for sure. So we're going to need another few months to prepare and equip. Okay. After a while, Lincoln's going like, no, okay, like, it's time to attack or we're going to lose. Or we're going to be attacked. And by the way, you're fired, and Ulysses S. Grant and Sherman are going to take over the sucker and, you know, burn their way through the South or whatever. Like, it's time for aggression. I don't know if this is good. Okay, so now, of course, you could lose a war that way, too. You know, maybe you should just fortify Washington or whatever. And maybe Grant gets his ass kicked. It's probably a near thing here and there. So do you give yourself the chance of victory? You know, not if you never attack, okay? And you'll never attack if you need absolute certainty that you'll win before you attack. So he says, not so are victories either over enemies or over nature gained. You can't get military victory this way. Also, you can't get scientific truth this way. If you just suspend belief until you have absolutely decisive reasons to believe. Science ventures forth in all sorts of ways, you know. Maybe Einstein has the intuitions, and then the experimental data arises to confirm them in some way. But the point is, like, he trusts his own intuitions enough to say, like, okay, I think this is true. He doesn't go like, okay, no. I didn't arrive at that with an adequate justification, so let's dismiss that and go back to the traditional Newtonian physics or whatever. Our errors are surely not such solemn things. In a world where we are so certain to incur them in spite of all our caution, a certain lightness of heart seems healthier than this excessive nervousness on their behalf. At any rate, it seems the fittest thing for an empiricist philosopher. He calls himself an empiricist. Though what he means by that is kind of interesting. It's not exactly Humean empiricism. He calls it radical empiricism. And, you know, so I think he's right to say that in some ways, like, making a choice like that at the foundational and emotive level is my main commitment to avoiding error or seeking truth. Again, those are complexly interconnected, of course. You know, the basic emotional commitment ends up governing maybe this entire structure of philosophy or science or something like this, or your entire participation in it. And one thing he's saying is, like, just be courageous. If you think P is true, and it resonates emotionally for you, and maybe it's that God exists, okay, and there's not decisive reasons to not to believe it. For example, Kierkegaard is different on this. it's go ahead and believe, okay? Especially if it makes things better, especially if it makes you feel better. First of all, that's relevant to its truth, believe it or not, according to James. We'd have to talk about that. It's not the final disposes of the question of truth, that it makes you feel good to believe, but it is a relevant effect of the belief. So, like, for example, if religious faith is for you the difference between despair and hope, and the difference between despair and hope is the difference between living a productive or a miserable life, for instance, then go ahead and believe until they really prove it's false. Another thing he's saying is, look, it's just my beliefs, right? First of all, we're all wrong about all kinds of stuff, I bet. And second of all right, what I believe is not that significant. Right? I mean, maybe if I was in a position of great power or something like this, my belief structure would really make all the practical difference. And maybe there are situations where it would, for me, where, it's relevant to someone's safety or something like this. And then, I really probably ought to really try to ascertain the facts. In fact, for James, I ought to always try to ascertain the facts about things that I'm concerned with. But first of all, I'm not going to be able to ascertain the facts decisively in most cases. Foundationally, in any case, I can't erect human knowledge employing no assumptions. And second of all, in general, what really turns, I have to say this, on my political commitments. Like, say I support Biden or say I support Trump. You might eliminate me as a friend or something like that if I'm on the wrong side or whatever it might be, all right? But actually, you know what? First of all, my vote is one of 150 million votes. How much have I affected? I mean, I'm always trying to affect people's opinions, I guess. I'm always writing my opinions, tweeting my opinions, lecturing my opinions. I'm not sure I've persuaded anyone of anything. Even people like I've spent many years with, you know what I mean? I came out of that 10-year marriage with Marion Winnick, still an anarchist, and her still a socialist or whatever, But anyway, even if so like the effects of my actual beliefs are, pretty minimal or, are usually fairly minimal. And then again, but they maybe affect me and my happiness a lot. But I mean, he's not talking about that kind of selfish view either. He's even talking about us as a society. Do we kind of venture forth epistemically? Do we dare to believe what it would help us to believe? Or are we too scared to believe? So what motivates religious skepticism? There's probably lots of reasons. And there probably is motive reasons in every case, or emotive causes for religious skepticism in every case. But there are equally for religious belief. Okay, so, but where did I start that sentence? I don't know. Whether I believe in God is not that big a deal in the world, actually. Right? And it might be legitimate for me to consult how it would change me to believe it, at least in the absence of decisive reasons not to believe it, which does seem to be the state of play, I guess, once you get through the theodicies and stuff. Well, I just wanted to make sure we got to that point in James. Now we're going to go on to, again, one of my favorite texts in the history of texts, slices of Kierkegaard's concluding unscientific postscript to the philosophical fragments. there's a title for you. So see you Tuesday. I've gotten a dose of vaccine. Anyway, we're all still working on getting this live, getting this face to face, and I hope so soon. It's complex.